My own family called me a failure. At Christmas dinner, surrounded by their million-dollar jewelry, I was the only poor person they invited like an act of charity. And they were right. I don't have money. But they made one fatal mistake. The beat-up old watch on my wrist could buy their entire fortune, and my father was the only one who knew. My name is Serafina. You can call me Sarah. Before I tell you how the silence in that room became deafening, I need to know you're here. This story is hard to tell alone. If you're with me, just write "hearing" in the comments, or let me know what city you're listening from. Knowing someone out there understands means everything. Don't forget to subscribe. We're in this together now. Thank you. And this is how their world shattered. The world knows a gemstone by its fire, its final blinding flash, in a velvet-lined box. My world is the one before that. It's the low hum of the DOP arm, the hiss of the diamond-dusted lap, and the smell of oil and concentration. It's the dust. My workshop, Helia Lapidary, is a contradiction. Half clean room laboratory, with its spectroscope and immersion cells, half old world sanctuary filled with the scarred wooden benches of my trade. And on one of those benches, under the unforgiving glare of a task lamp, lay my current obsession, a Burmese spinel, the color of fresh pigeon's blood, fiery and alive. It was a notoriously difficult stone, full of internal tensions. A single wrong move on the wheel, and its heart would shatter into a million worthless pieces. I wasn't using the automated laser cutter, tucked in the corner, the one that promised soulless perfection. My hands were steady on a set of old, custom-made steel tools, their handles worn smooth by years of use. On the flat end of the polishing lap, nearly invisible with age, were two tiny letters: JC. Julian Croft, a memory sharp and clear as a flawless diamond surfaced. Julian, his eyes magnified by his loupe, not looking at me, but at the stone in my clumsy younger hands. "Stop fighting it, Sarah," he'd murmured, his voice raspy like stone against stone. "Don't force the gem to fit your idea. Listen to the story it wants to tell. You are just the one helping it speak." I let out a breath, my fingers adjusting the angle of the spinel by a fraction of a degree. I was listening. It was telling me about a river in Mogok, about a journey through darkness, about the fire it held inside. My job was simply to cut the windows, to let that fire out. A soft chime from my laptop broke the spell. I glanced over. An email flagged as important. The sender was Sotheby's, Geneva. "Dear Ms. Vance," it began, the formality almost comical in my dusty workshop. "We have been made aware through trusted channels that you are in possession of the Mogok spinel. We have a private client who is prepared to make a significant 8-figure offer for the stone in its current uncut state." I felt a familiar wave of irritation. I closed the email without a second thought. They didn't get it. They never did. To them, it was an asset to be acquired, a number in a ledger. They didn't see the potential locked inside the perfect heart I was slowly, painstakingly revealing. The value wasn't in owning it. It was in liberating it. I turned back to the wheel, the low hum a comforting song. But before my hands could find their rhythm again, my phone buzzed violently on the bench. The caller ID flashed a name that made the quiet sanctuary of my workshop feel instantly invaded. Eleanor Vance, my mother. This wasn't a social call. With her, it was always a summons. "Serafina." Her voice came through the speakerphone as crisp and curated as the art in her penthouse. There was no warmth, just the impeccable pronunciation, of a woman who saw a conversation as a series of strategic moves. Hi, Mom. I trust I'm not interrupting anything important. She said a phrase that meant, whatever you're doing is by definition not important. The family is getting together for Christmas dinner at the Olympian Club this year. It will be cozy. Just us. Cozy was her word for a private dining room that probably had a stricter dress code than the White House. Just us meant the entire Vance clan would be there ready to perform for one another. I'm in the middle of a project, Mom. It's a delicate stage. Oh, that's nice, dear, she said, her tone dismissing my life's work as a hobby. Listen, do you need me to send a stylist over just to help you find something festively appropriate? Nothing too complicated. The unspoken words hung in the air so you don't embarrass us again. I gritted my teeth. I think I can manage to dress myself, thanks. Wonderful. And you must come congratulate your cousin. Tristan just made the cover of Lux World magazine, a feature on his marketing genius. We're all so proud. Of course they were. Tristan, the brand director for a global jewelry giant, was a master of selling glitter and dreams. I, on the other hand, was the weird cousin who actually got her hands dirty. Oh, and your father sent an early Christmas gift for you, she added, and despite myself, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. A gift. From him. Maybe this time. Alexander has just invested in a fascinating new materials company, she continued, and my hope began to curdle. They've synthesized a flawless crystal in the lab. Absolutely perfect. He sent a sample for you. Thought you might find it interesting for your work. The flicker of hope was extinguished, replaced by a cold, familiar ache. It was a profound insult, wrapped in the language of thoughtful generosity. A lab-grown, soulless crystal for the woman who dedicated her life to the imperfect, ancient beauty born from the earth. He didn't just not understand my work. He saw it as something that could be replicated and improved upon by a machine in a sterile lab. The silence stretched. Thank him? For me? I said, my voice flatter than I intended. But you know, I only work with what the Earth creates, not what a reactor spits out. A long, weary sigh came through the phone. It was her signature sound of disappointment. Don't be late, Serafina. And please, try not to make things awkward. The line went dead, leaving a silence in the workshop far heavier than before. The conversation left a bitter taste in my mouth. I felt the familiar walls of my workshop closing in, the pressure of my family's world pressing against my own. I needed grounding. I needed to remember why I chose this life. I walked to a far corner of the lab, to an old fireproof cabinet. Inside, under a stack of geological maps, was a simple, unadorned box made of dark walnut. I opened it. It didn't hold gemstones. It held the relics of my mentor, Julian Croft. His handwritten notebooks filled with complex diagrams of light and angles, a few rough stones he never got the chance to cut. And nestled in a bed of worn velvet, his watch. It was an old A. Lung and Suna, its leather strap cracked with age, its silver case scratched from a lifetime of leaning over a fasting wheel. I picked it up. The memory of the day he gave it to me was as vivid as the inclusions in a sapphire. He was already sick, then his hands too unsteady to work. He'd pressed it into my palm. The movement inside is a masterpiece, he'd said, his voice a low whisper. But the most valuable thing on this watch isn't the mechanism. It's the crystal. He tapped the glass. The world thinks the night comet sapphire was lost in the Amsterdam heist. The truth is, I kept the heart of it. This is a slice from its very core. I made it to remind myself that true beauty often requires you to look past the surface. Just then, the courier buzzed from downstairs. My father's gift had arrived. A few minutes later, I was staring at a small, heavy box on my workbench. Inside, resting on a satin pillow, was a cube of crystal. It was, as my mother had said, perfect. Too perfect. It had no flaws, no history, no soul. It was a brilliant, sterile lie. I placed it next to a raw, uncut sapphire from my own collection. The natural stone was cloudy, lumpy, its potential hidden behind a rough exterior. But I could feel its story, its ancient energy. The synthetic cube was silent. The contrast decided it for me. My eyes fell on Julian's watch. It wasn't a conscious thought, more of an instinct, a need for armor. I unclasped it and fastened the worn leather strap around my wrist. It felt heavy, solid, a tangible link to a man who understood. This wasn't a display of wealth. No one in my family would recognize its brand, let alone the secret it held. It was a talisman, a silent testament to my values, to Julian's philosophy. It was my weapon for the battle to come. I caught my reflection in the dark screen of the spectroscope. A woman in a simple work shirt, her hands smudged with the dust of ancient stones, and on her wrist a quiet legend. "All right, Julian," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see whose story wins tonight." I turned off the lights, locked the heavy door of the workshop behind me, and walked out into the cold December air. The deep, throaty growl of my Triumph Bonneville's engine echoed in the quiet alley, a defiant roar, before I sped off towards the glittering heart of the city, toward the dinner that was waiting for me. I parked the Triumph in a shadowed corner of the pristine parking garage, a lone piece of worn leather and polished steel amongst a fleet of silent black German sedans. The contrast was a slap in the face before I even walked through the door. The Olympian Club wasn't a place you just entered. You presented yourself to it. Outside, the New York Christmas air was sharp and real. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old money, mahogany, expensive cigar smoke, and a cloying hint of perfume. It was a hermetically sealed world of artificial warmth. Men in bespoke suits stood in hushed, powerful circles, while women adorned with cold, glittering stones eyed each other's wrists and necklines. And then there was me, in my wool trousers, cashmere turtleneck, and leather jacket. I wasn't dressed poorly, just functionally. In this world, that was the same as being naked. Every head that turned my way did so with a look of polite, surgical curiosity. I was an anomaly, a bug in their perfect system. My mother materialized from a conversation gliding towards me. "Serafina," she said, her smile perfectly in place as she air-kissed the space beside my cheeks. She hugged me, but it was an embrace of assessment. Her hand lingered on my collar, subtly straightening it. It was a gesture of ownership, not affection. "You look so very raw," she whispered, her breath smelling of champagne. "Next time, we must let my stylist help." Before I could answer, my cousin Tristan appeared, a vision of tailored arrogance in a Tom Ford suit, a glass of amber liquid swirling in his hand. He didn't greet me. He addressed his wife, who was dripping in new diamonds. "See, darling Nile crocodile, the limited edition clutch." Only after the performance did he turn to me. "Cousin," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Been a while. Still playing with pebbles?" His words were meant to be a joke, a light jab, but they were coated in the familiar poison of condescension. I forced a tight smile, my hand instinctively going to my wrist, feeling the solid weight of Julian's watch beneath my cuff. And then I saw him. My father, Alexander, stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city below. He had his back to the room, a solitary figure amidst the forced cheer. For a moment, his shoulders seemed to slump with a weariness I recognized in myself. He turned slightly, and our eyes met across the expanse of Persian rug and quiet judgment. In that brief, silent second, I saw something flicker in his gaze, not affection, but a shared melancholy, a mutual understanding of being an outsider in a world of his own making. I felt a sudden urge to walk over, to stand beside him in that silence. Maybe, just maybe. Dad Tristan's voice sliced through the moment, sharp and opportunistic. I need to introduce you to our partners from LVMH. They just flew in. Just like that, the connection was severed. My father's mask of the powerful investor snapped back into place. He was swallowed by a group of men in identical suits, leaving me alone in the center of the room, the gulf between us wider than ever. The hope, so small and fragile, dissolved into the expensive air. We were seated at a long, impossibly polished mahogany table. The centerpiece was an elaborate floral arrangement that cost more than my monthly rent. The dinner began, and with it, the performance. It was a symphony of brand names, a carefully orchestrated recital of acquisitions and achievements. Tristan's wife, Chloe, started. "Tristan surprised me with this," she said, tilting her head to catch the light on a necklace of blindingly white diamonds. "It's from their new high jewelry collection." My Aunt Pamela chimed in. "How lovely." "We just got back from Milan. The shopping was divine, but finding things that are truly unique is such a chore." I stayed silent, a ghost at the feast, pushing a piece of truffle-dusted scallop around my plate. Under the table, my thumb traced the cool, smooth surface of Julian's watch. It was my anchor in this sea of empty luxury. Tristan, having sufficiently warmed up his audience, turned the spotlight on me. We just launched a new campaign for a 10-carat blue diamond, he announced to the table, though his eyes were fixed on me. "We're calling it the Heart of the Ocean. It's brilliant. The brand story is everything you see. People don't buy a stone, they buy a dream." He leaned forward, a smirk playing on his lips. "You get that right, Sarah. The value is in the story you tell, not in the boring work of cutting and polishing." The insult was slick, wrapped in the language of a business lecture. Before I could formulate a response, Aunt Pamela leaned in her face, a mask of practiced concern. "Sarah, darling, your work must be so difficult. I have a friend who owns a chain of jewelry stores in the mall. If you ever need a stable outlet for your products, I could make an introduction." The offer hung in the air, thick with pity. She had reduced my art, my life's work, to trinkets sold next to a food court. The fire of 1,000 suns locked in the heart of a stone reduced to a mall kiosk. This time, I was ready. I opened my mouth, a sharp, precise retort on my tongue. "The dreams you sell, Tristan, I was going to say, are built on the foundation of the boring work done by people like me." "Oh, look." My mother's voice cut through the air, bright and sharp as shattering glass. "They're bringing the main course, New Zealand rack of lamb." And just like that, my voice was stolen. My mother, in her desperate attempt to avoid any unpleasantness, had silenced me more effectively than any insult could have. She had rendered me invisible again. Tristan saw his opening. He had cornered me, and now He was moving in for the kill. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of feigned sympathy that felt like a lead weight. "Listen, cousin," he said, his voice low and confidential, yet loud enough for the entire table to hear. "There's no shame in it. Your passion is a wonderful hobby, but it's not a career. It must be a struggle. To live like this." He squeezed my shoulder. "If you want, I can find a spot for you in my design department. Family has to take care of family after all." The words hit me. A struggle. He had finally said it. He had painted my life as a pathetic, failed endeavor in need of his charity. The symphony of brands stopped. The clinking of silver faded. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the table as every eye turned to me, filled not with malice, but with something far worse, pity. In the crushing silence that followed Tristan's offer, I said nothing. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my words trapped behind a wall of anger and humiliation. I simply clenched my fists under the table, my knuckles white. My silence was their confirmation. To them, it was an admission of defeat, a quiet acceptance of my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. Tristan leaned back in his chair, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He had won. But across the table, something had shifted. My father, who had been a silent, distant observer all evening, suddenly narrowed his eyes. He wasn't looking at me or at Tristan's triumphant face. His gaze had drifted down, snagged by a small detail no one else had noticed. It was fixed on my wrist where the cuff of my sleeve had pulled back slightly, revealing the dull silver case of Julian's watch. My father's expression was unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through the thick atmosphere like a diamond blade. "Your watch." The table stirred. Everyone looked confused. Tristan shot his father a questioning glance, assuming he was about to join in on criticizing my worn-out accessory. "Let me see it." My father commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The moment felt surreal. The entire evening's drama, the showcase of wealth, the condescension, all of it suddenly pivoted on this one unexpected request. I hesitated, then slowly unclasped the old leather strap and passed the watch across the table. A hush fell as my father picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, examining it under the dim, expensive light of the dining room. He didn't look at the brand name on the face. He held it at an angle, his eyes focused intently on the crystal. The silence stretched for an eternity. Tristan began to fidget, a nervous smirk still lingering on his face. Then my father placed the watch back on the table. He took a slow sip of his wine. He shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and said nothing. A collective, unspoken sigh of relief went around the table. The tension broke. He hadn't seen anything. It was just a strange whim. Tristan's smugness returned tenfold. He had weathered the odd interruption, and his victory was now complete. The conversation started to bubble up again, the moment of strangeness already being forgotten. Clack! The sound of my father's heavy wine glass hitting the mahogany table silenced the room for a second time. It was a sharp, deliberate sound that made everyone flinch. He wasn't looking at the watch anymore. He was looking directly at me, his eyes boring into mine with an intensity I had never seen before. The distant, distracted father was gone. In his place was the sharp, analytical investor, a man who had built an empire on understanding the fundamental nature of things. His voice was low, heavy, and stripped of all pretense. "Serafina," he said, and the entire room held its breath. Where did you get the sapphire for that crystal? My father's question hung in the dead air of the room, heavier than the weight of all the diamonds my family wore combined. It was a question so precise, so far outside their world of brands and price tags, that they couldn't even begin to grasp its significance. But I could. And for the first time that night, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I wasn't the defendant anymore. I was the witness. I met my father's intense gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away. My voice, when it came, was calm and clear. "It's not synthetic, Dad," I said. It was cut from the heart of the night comet. The name landed on the table with a physical force. The night comet. Even in their world of commercial luxury, the name was a legend. A mythical sapphire of impossible size and a deep, star-dusted blue, rumored to have been lost to the world 2 decades ago in a high-profile heist. My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He snatched the watch from the table, his movements sharp, almost frantic. From his vest pocket he produced a small, powerful jeweler's loop, a detail so out of place for him, yet it revealed a hidden depth I'd never known. He held the watch up to his eye, tilting it under the light his breath held. "It can't be." He whispered more to himself than to anyone else. "The silk inclusions, the crystalline structure, it's real. It's real." His voice was a cocktail of disbelief and profound respect. Tristan finally found his voice a stuttering, pale version of its earlier confidence. How did you get it?" I let the question hang for a moment before delivering the final, decisive blow. "Julian Croft gave it to me," I said simply. "He was my teacher." If the night comet was a shock, the name Julian Croft was an earthquake. In the world of gemology, Croft was a god, the reclusive genius, who had invented the revolutionary cutting techniques that defined the modern era before disappearing from the public eye completely. My father collapsed back into his chair as if his legs had given out. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind, forming a picture he had never allowed himself to see. "You were his only apprentice?" I just nodded. I didn't offer any more information. I let them work for it. I watched as they struggled to connect the dots: the quiet, unimpressive cousin, the legendary master, the mythical stone. I could see the dawning horror and confusion on their faces as their entire carefully constructed reality began to crumble. They were realizing not just that they were wrong about me, but how profoundly, how embarrassingly ignorant they had been. It was my father who delivered the coup de grace. His eyes, now full of a fierce, protective pride, shot across the table to his nephew. "Tristan," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that blue diamond you're so proud of, the heart of the ocean. Who cut it?" Tristan's face went white. He knew the answer, of course. It was the most guarded secret in his company. He stammered, unable to speak. My father spoke for him. It was Helia Lapidary. He said the name, dropping like a stone into a silent pool. An anonymous workshop that no one can get into, run by a master no one has ever seen. The only artist in the world trusted with the most important gems. He turned his gaze back to me, a slow, dawning understanding, softening his features. "Helia was your grandmother's middle name." The final truth landed. The air crackled with it. I wasn't just the student of a legend. I was the ghost they had all been chasing. The silence that followed was a living thing. It was filled with the wreckage of assumptions, the dust of shattered egos. The power dynamic in the room hadn't just shifted. It had been annihilated and rebuilt from scratch. Tristan was the most visibly broken. His entire identity, his marketing genius, was built on selling stories. He had just discovered that the substance of those stories, the very magic he monetized, was created by the cousin he'd spent a decade belittling. The whiskey in his hand trembled, the ice cubes clinking a frantic, unsteady rhythm. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a horrifying new understanding. My mother looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. She didn't understand the specifics of sapphires or secret workshops, but she understood the names. She understood the shift in power. Why she finally whispered, her voice thin and reedy. "Why didn't you ever say anything, Sarah?" "Because I wanted you to see me." I answered, my voice gentle but firm. "Not my bank account." The rest of the family, sensing the change in the wind, began to pivot with a speed that was almost comical. The pity was gone, replaced by a greedy, sycophantic curiosity. Aunt Pamela was suddenly asking about investment opportunities. An uncle I hadn't spoken to in years wanted to know what it was like to work with Julian Croft. I answered them politely, my voice even, and cool, creating a distance they could feel, but not name. In the midst of this chaotic recalibration, my father did something unexpected. He walked over to where Tristan sat frozen in his chair and placed a hand on his shoulder. He said nothing. It was a complex gesture, part comfort for his nephew's public humiliation, part a silent admission of his own complicity in the shallow value system that had led them to this moment. In that single quiet action, I saw my father acknowledge not only my worth, but the hollowness of their own success. That was my cue. I stood up. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the rising chatter, "I think Christmas dinner is over. I'm going to head home." I didn't gloat. I didn't stay to savor the victory. I simply excused myself. My departure was a statement more powerful than any word I could have said. It declared without arrogance that I didn't need their approval. I had my own world built on my own terms, and I was now returning to it. In the cold, quiet cavern of the parking garage, the growl of the Triumph's engine felt like a deep, cleansing breath. As I swung my leg over the seat, a figure emerged from the shadows of the concrete pillars. It was my father. He followed me as I wheeled the bike towards the exit, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. When I stopped at the gate, he finally spoke. His first words weren't about money or Julian Croft or the night comet. "I'm sorry, Serafina," he said, his voice raw. "Not because I didn't realize how successful you are, but because I didn't realize how brilliant you are." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the powerful investor, but a man wrestling with his own ghosts. "I spent my life chasing the new." He confessed, his gaze fixed on the sterile perfection of the garage around us. Synthetic materials, new technologies. "I think I was trying to escape your grandfather's shadow. He was a classicist and art collector. I wanted to build value out of things he could never understand." He finally turned to look at me. I was so busy trying to create perfection in a lab that I forgot about the imperfect beauty of the real world. "You never forgot that." He took a step closer. "I don't want to interfere in your work," he said. "But if you ever find a stone, something so complex that you think no current technology can map it, call me. Maybe my expertise and your artistry. Maybe we could create something truly special together." For a moment, the old hurt flared up. My defensive walls went high. "I don't need your approval," I wanted to say. But I held my tongue. This wasn't an offer of money or a handout. It was an offer of collaboration, an admission of respect between two masters of their own very different worlds. He had finally found a way to bridge the gap between us, not with the empty language of family obligation, but with the solid language of mutual respect. I was quiet for a long time. Then I gave a small, slow nod. "I'll think about it," I said. And for the first time that night, a real small smile touched my lips. It was a beginning. A few weeks later, I was back in my workshop, the world outside blanketed in a fresh layer of snow. The Mogok spinel sat on the DOP, its final facette polished to a perfect, gleaming finish. It pulsed with a deep internal light, its story finally fully told. My phone buzzed. It was my father. He didn't ask about the spinel or Sotheby's or any of my clients. "Are you free this weekend?" he asked. "The Museum of Mineralogy has a new exhibit. I thought we could go together." I smiled a genuine warm smile that reached my eyes. "Yes, Dad," I said. "I'd like that very much." I ended the call and looked at the magnificent gemstone before me. It was a masterpiece of nature and skill, a symbol of a truth that had been brought into the light. On my wrist, Julian Croft's watch rested quietly, its sapphire crystal, gleaming a silent witness to it all. In the end, the victory wasn't loud. It didn't come from the shock on their faces or the sudden shift in their respect. It came quietly in a cold parking garage with a simple apology that wasn't about money, but about sight, about being truly seen for the first time. My father and I didn't find common ground in a shared fortune, but in a fragile, newfound respect for each other's worlds. We didn't erase the past. We just found a way to start building a new future on a foundation of truth. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. You were a witness to a moment I've kept hidden for a long time. If you have ever felt like your true value was invisible to the people you love most, just drop a yes in the comments. You don't have to share your story, but that one word will let me and everyone else here know that we are not alone in this feeling. I'd also love to know where you're watching from. It's a beautiful reminder of how far a single voice can reach. And if this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more truths to uncover, and I'd be honored to have you here with me.